Hi, I'm Andrew Ledbetter from Texas Christian University, and today I'm talking to Dr. Mark Orbe, who is the creator of co-cultural theory. So in the book, the primary examples of co-cultural groups that we use stem from your research on African American men, members of the LGBTQ community, and also those with physical disabilities. To what other kinds of co-cultural groups does your theory apply?
There were certain international scholars who studied Koreans living in Japan as a co-cultural group, Roma people in Europe as a co-cultural group. One of the most interesting I found were people studied high school students, high school AT students, like academically talented students, socially as a co-cultural group. And I thought, I'm one who believes that either you're going to be a nerd or you're going to work for nerds for the rest of your life. So I struggle with this idea that people in academically talented programs are co-cultural group members, because traditionally I wouldn't see them as a co-cultural group member, but socially they are. You know, if you look at the social hierarchy of a high school, for instance.
So they're kind of the outcasts, those that are not the popular kids.
They're not the jocks. Yeah, exactly. So I think that kind of creative way in which we can understand different religious minorities, if they are Mormon or Muslim, people have studied that perspective as well. So it's really grown beyond what I initially thought would be the kind of core groups that one would study in really interesting ways, So as we have students watching this video, professors, other people watching this video, I'm sure there are many people nodding their heads saying, yeah, I get that. I resonate with that. That theory describes my experience as I've communicated in a situation where I'm a member of a marginalized group. What advice would co-cultural theory give to those students who are feeling that kind of resonance with the theory? Well, I hope there's some validation that they feel in terms of their own experiences and some almost solidarity, if you will, seeing that there's commonality. So oftentimes when students read this, they know the theory. They've lived the theory. Now they have labels and a kind of conceptual framework that allows them to explain what they've been feeling to others in a way in which now they feel validated, where it's just not always about them and their own experiences and really feeling isolated that they're the only ones who participated in this particular strategy, this particular practice. So I think outside of that, I'm hoping that the advice is be mindful about the choices that you make. One of my big mantras with my students is make good choices. You know, so if you decide to utilize this, go for it, but use it the way in which works best for you. But it also allows people to know they do have choices. So if you are a co-cultural group member, you don't have to assimilate. That is not the only way that you have to communicate. Be mindful, if you make other choices, there are certain perceived costs and rewards that come with those. But I believe in agency and allowing people to sense that they're not stuck in having to communicate one particular way.
So I'm sure there are those watching this video that say, you know, I'm not a member of a co-cultural group, at least most of the time I don't identify in that way. I'm a member of a dominant group. What advice does the theory give to somebody who would recognize themselves as tending to be part of a dominant group?
My entire graduate career was steeped in assimilation early on and using the strategies of extra overcompensation and extensive preparation. Like I was that person who had to read articles 3 or 4 times, and then I would look words up, and I always felt like I had to over-prepare. And in that particular context, I don't think people recognize that. But for me, that was the only point that I was going to be able to succeed. So have a dominant group member recognize that. If I ever had a professor, I never did, but if I ever had a professor say, wow, it seems like, you know, you went the extra mile on this. And in my mind, I had to go the extra mile just to reach the average. But having that acknowledgement is fine as well. I will tell you, at this National Communication Association conference, one of my colleagues at Arizona State and I have created this dominant group theory. So we're looking at how dominant group members, their perspective, because co-cultural theory is grounded in the perspective, the lived experiences of co-cultural group members. And if we're really going to understand the interactions between co-cultural groups and dominant groups, we should also pay attention, as his name is Robert Rizzanti, told me, we need to pay attention to dominant groups, and he identifies predominantly as a dominant group member. So we're trying to understand dominant group communication with the same nuances and complexities that we have been trying to understand co-cultural group members.
Well, so the goal then is to identify, hey, these are the strategies or approaches or preferred outcomes that dominant group members engage in. Is that
It
what
is.
you're
It
trying
is.
to do?
It is. And right now, Rosanti and Orbe have a piece in press at Communication Theory, which was the place where co-cultural theory was probably first published in '98. And we did the same thing. We kind of outlined the communication orientations for dominant group members. There were some shifts in terms of some of the factors. So instead of preferred outcome, it was interactional effect in terms of how do dominant group members either reinforce these dominant structures, how do they impede them on the interpersonal level, or how do they dismantle them. So even dominant group members have choices in terms of how they communicate, if they're just going to reinforce the sexism in the room, or if they're going to impede and disrupt it on an interpersonal level, or they're going to work to actively take down some of the structures that inform sexism.
Mark, would you consider co-cultural theory to be a critical theory?
You know, I don't think it fits nicely into some of the paradigmatic structures that we place theories in. It was grounded to be interpretive, to be kind of descriptive in its power, but because it acknowledges the power imbalances, I think it is a critical theory. I wouldn't necessarily have started out thinking about it in that regard, but because I was studying issues of oppression, issues of marginalization, it has to be understood in that context that we're studying power dimensions. And there is some critique, some critical approach to it in that regard.
Right. What's the role then of listening in co-cultural theory?
It's just key. It is key. Oftentimes I'm in a certain situation and I don't say a lot. My grandmother once told me, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so you should listen twice as much as you speak. She probably told that to me specifically, but it's okay. So for me, but people say you're a communication person, why aren't you talking? And I'm like, well, I'm a communication person. I'm not a speech person necessarily, so I'm communicating, I'm just listening. And I think what it is so now field of experience, it's your life story. And I have found when you take the time and people allow you to understand a life story, you see them in transformative ways. So if we can see one another as a product of a larger life story and not just as a unidimensional character, that's key. And you can only do that through listening.